Okay, we start with 2 microphones here, and then after we have said a couple of words, we skip over 1 microphone for you, 1 microphone for us, and then we hope to get in a joint conversation or discussion, the best. So I don't think we have to introduce ourselves, despite the fact that there is this will be videoed and put on the website. So yeah.
Can you just say our names again?
Yeah. Okay. It would be good if we say our name and then once, and then we continue to talk. Maybe we start with that.
So I'm Julian Scordaro. I'm a chair professor at Conservatorio di Salerno of music informatics, and I'm a composer and music technologist. And well, I wrote the Iannis documentation, so maybe that's why I'm here. That's it.
Sharon Kanach, Vice President, Centre Xenakis, based at the University of Rouen, and former close collaborator of Xenakis, mainly with his writings, but also many other projects.
Alain Després, I was the director of Les Ateliers UPIC, and I worked on the first version of the UPIC from 1979 to 1990.
I am Guy Médig. I am the ancestor of UPIC, and I was working at CEMAMU from 1976 to 1980.
Okay, I'm Chikashi Miyama. So I'm a software developer working in Düsseldorf and teaching computer music at College of Music in Cologne. And I used to work here at ZKM as a software developer, and together with Rüdiger developed Zirconium MK which involves a lot of GUI for composers and so on. That's why probably I'm here. Yep.
So I'm Ludger Brömer, head of the Herzlabor at the ZKM, the newly founded institution as a result of the merge of Institute for Music and Acoustic and Institute for Visual Media. So let's start into the discussion about the conference, basically, or topics we have touched, or we have already began to discuss. There are 2 things for me which were quite a good beginning point. One was very early, so I'm not sure if that is still important. That was the real time. I think you brought it in. The real time question, the difference between the real time and the non-real time. And the second was, I think, was in the very end, a question of the approach to define everything from the waveform to the composition, the formal approach, which we have discussed already in one of the later lectures. And this could be 2 starting points, but on the other hand, of what we were researching in this lecture, in this symposium, was basically having a look at the at the existence of UPIC, at the beginning ideas, at the situation, technical and aesthetic situation in the beginning period of the 70s, late 70s, and as well we wanted to have a look what became this idea, this technology today, software, conceptually, aesthetic, usage, examples, music. So all of this we want to put into our big observation bassin, basically. Do you have already a conclusion?
Sorry, I will speak in French and ask Sharon to translate. J'ai quitté l'UPIC en 1990 et j'ai de nouveau entendu parler de l'UPIC il y a 2 jours.
I left the Youpick Realm in 1990, and I've heard about the Youpick Realm again for the first time a couple of days ago.
Entre les deux, rien.
Between the two, nothing.
Alors, mon sentiment aujourd'hui, c'est que au début de l'UPIC, les compositeurs avaient tendance à chercher les limites de la machine, essayaient de trouver une manière de dépasser les limites qu'avait fixées le monsieur qui est à côté de moi, là, Guy Médig.
So, in the beginning, he thought that the composers who were working on UPIC were searching for the UPIC's limits and how they could go beyond the limits and to challenge Mr. Guy Médig to develop new tools for the instrument.
30 ans plus tard, quand j'ai vu les choses que vous avez présentées les uns et les autres, je me demande si un compositeur qui veut travailler avec l'une de vos machines n'a pas intérêt à faire le contraire et à se fixer des contraintes de création.
He said now, 30 years later, being introduced to new tools that have been developed, he wonders whether composers shouldn't ask themselves the opposite question, meaning which constraints should I put in order to remain creative with the machine?
Une des questions que je me pose, c'est avec les systèmes que vous avez présentés, il y a 2 possibilités. Soit c'est un système qui me semble extrêmement complexe à manager, et alors ce que je voudrais savoir, c'est soit vous faites le système pour vous-même, soit vous le faites pour autrui. Je continuerai après.
One of the things that I've noticed is that some of the systems that have been presented are highly complex, and I ask myself the question whether they are highly complex because they need to be highly complex, or are they highly complex because the people who are developing them want them to be highly complex, developing them for themselves, challenging their own capacities.
Si vous concevez le système pour vous-même, alors vous prenez une triple casquette de facteur d'instrument, de compositeur et d'instrumentiste.
If you're creating the instrument for yourself, you're wearing 3 baseball caps. One is as an instrument builder, second as a composer, and the third as a performer.
Et vous devez être excellent dans les 3 domaines, ce qui n'est pas évident.
And you have to excel in all 3 of them, which is not an obvious task.
Si vous faites ces systèmes pour que les autres les utilisent, alors il me paraît évident qu'il faut abandonner la complexité et tendre vers la simplicité.
If you're building these systems for other people to be able to use it, it seems obvious to me that they should be simplified in many cases in order for them to be exploitable by others on a sort of natural, intuitive level.
Et à l'inverse, si vous faites un système pour les autres, je pense à UPIC, n'ayez pas peur de jouer la simplicité. C'est la seule condition pour que les autres puissent l'utiliser.
If you're doing something deliberately for others, as we are doing at SIX with UPIC, don't hesitate to be simple. That simplicity is actually a goal.
Xenakis, you are a developer as well as a composer, as a user. What can you answer to this request for simplicity? Because I personally think simplicity today is the result of a highly active reduction process. Mm-hmm. So it does not it's not a decision to be complex. That's my feeling. Do you agree?
It's a difficult question, but yes. Reduction is really what I want, actually. So the current software provides too many things. That's for sure. Yeah. And why I'm kind of continue to developing software for myself is I need my own restriction. That's the strong motivation behind that. But yeah, because if I use another software, it offers too many possibilities. And but I try to frame myself in my own interesting context. It's kind of I can achieve that by really make my own software. I need a complexity, but complexity in many different directions. It's just one direction complexity, one direction complexity, or strong cage or a strong framework I need to compose right now, because so many noises over there. So yeah, that's kind of my solution to that. And I think many composers try to program their own software right now because of that. They need to develop their own context, I guess.
Mm-hmm. When I compare this, Shikashi is a composer creating his own software, and Julian, you are basically using an instrument, a pre-existing instrument. So that's another approach when you compare this. Like Iannis is an instrument which is not considered an individual instrument. It's a tool for, let's say, everyone. It's a general tool. So what is because I think when you take UPIC as an example, was it a Xenakis tool, or was it a unified tool, a pedagogic tool, or for everyone? What is the difference between this approach?
Well, I think the openness I was talking about before was even in the direction of implementing what user needs and what composers need. This actually happened mainly during Iannis' workshops. So that was the occasion of bug fixing, I have to say this, and future implementation. But I think a key is the possibility, I'm relating now to the question before, of working of different levels of complexity. So if I'm not a great programmer, I can use another approach, a simpler approach, and do things even complex, but with a simple approach. So that was, I called it multimodality. To have different ways to approach this tool, actually.
To answer one aspect of your question about is UPIC a tool for Xenakis or by Xenakis, basically. And I often remember or think that if you say Xenakis to the world, specifically the musical world, UPIC doesn't jump to mind. Right? You say Xenakis and people think metastasis, think about architecture, think about Phillips Pavilion, think about this and that. But you say UPIC and everybody thinks Xenakis. Okay, so there is this sort of adhesion between the idea of UPIC and Xenakian thought. And I think it really is a Xenakian tool, and I think it's one that he mastered because he is the person who spent the most time with it too. But as we mentioned several times, that learning these tools is like learning an instrument. You know, we're looking for the immediacy now of being able to do this. And I think we do succeed in a way with children as a pedagogic tool in the state it is in now. Very intuitively, the idea of drawing music and hearing a result in real time, that functions, that really, really functions. And perhaps we will get now out of the idea that it's a Xenakian idea, that it's more of a tool out there. As a compositional tool for professional composers, I think, you know, with future iterations and everything else, it's going to be like any other instrument. You need to work with it. You need to practice. You need to build chops, as we say in America, in order to appropriate the machine. And unfortunately, because of, it was only, what, in 90 or 91 that the software version, 91? Yeah, 91. And wasn't very well distributed or widespread or whatever. Most, when we talk about UPIC composers, we're talking about UPIC composers who worked on the drawing board. Not so much UPIC composers working off of the software version. So this is a chapter yet to be written, in my opinion.
And another question we did not,
Sorry for the video. Cyril Delay, French musicologist, and sixth member. It's for communication. I have a question for you. What is a score? Because I think it's important to highlight the creative process now. We see in Iannis a recursive score, but it's not a score for me. Are you agree, or what? What do you think about that?
We were talking before, so
you are prepared.
yeah. So I think we have different degrees of recursiveness. Okay, so we can imagine just a control score that has some degree of randomness, for example. So we might choose from different paths. Okay. So why not a score? I think, of course, is a kind of score.
Right. For me, a score, it's if you took the Jean Meria, professor in science in information and communication, and when he defined a document, he said that a document is an information on a support to communicate. And a score for me is just a support to communicate between one human, a creator, and another human or machine.
So not between machines, you mean?
Yeah, but with the recursive scores, the machine dialogue between the machine. And finally, it's just a graphical representation of input-output, but it could be music or not. It's just you see what the machine created, but it's not a score because ça n'interroge pas les processus créateurs entre l'humain et la machine. Je sais pas comment dire.
Well, I disagree actually, because I think in Music 1, for example, we had the score and the orchestra, so that was a score that communicates with the machine. So isn't it a score?
This was the score, but what maybe Cyril is questioning is that when you imagine, for example, at first there's nothing. You've got just you in your mind, so you imagine music. So at some point you have to transmit this music to either a machine or an instrument player. How do you do that? For example, I suppose that in your case, sometimes you might be tempted to make drawings before. For example, I don't know, sketches, but then the result that you are showing is not a score because you don't know when you read the score, you don't know where what will happen anyway at which time. So that's just and it gets back to the old-time question that I'm asking. It's what can we do if we don't have a representation of the time somewhere?
Yeah.
That's it. That's okay.
You understand?
But if you have older scores, before Gregorian or during Gregorian chants, during this time where the scores are at all, or a scriptum was invented, you don't have a representation of proper time as well. There is no, it's like certain symbols are described, certain points, but all the actions are let's say, known by the performers, but not written in the score. So you couldn't call this a score because there's nothing written what is happening. It's only a summary or simplification of the structure of the music. And even we would consider this a score. And the second thought was, is UPIC a score? Because it talks to the machine and not to a human. It's I would consider this a score in terms of a summary of the musical action. That's what I would say is a more modern description of a score. And this can talk to a machine or can talk to a human. And so a recursive score, in my opinion, would be a good description of the musical action. But of course, at the same time, it's a generator.
Yeah, I would like to add, if possible, I think this is quite interesting issue with kind of that kind of brings us back into this kind of general questions on kind of musical semiotics and what does it mean to write a score or to read a score, and the concept of interpretation, and score is always, in a way, an abstraction of certain ideas and concepts, the way as Ludger pointed out. And I think, like even in modern times and in the domain of instrumental music, you could see scores of Cornelius Cardew being fully graphic, non-standard notation, very often with open timing and with no indications whatsoever regarding pitch, dynamics, and so on. And these scores required from musicians to talk to each other beforehand, to communicate, to, in a way, agree on the meaning of certain symbols. And then on the other extreme, you have this radicalization of traditional scoring in compositions of Fahrenhofer. This is kind of like, another extreme. And I think this idea of what is the score, it's always, this question is always open, and probably we can't always agree that certain artifacts are scores or not. And then as well in that context you have this whole a differentiation between the symbolic representations such as notes and dynamics. So symbol requires additional context. You have to know the meaning of the symbol. And then I think what relates to more to UPIC is this iconic representation of sound. You could easily follow the lines and associate the movement with the changes in pitch, which I think these are quite I think important distinctions when we talk about scores and the way they exist in music or in culture in general.
Someone, yeah?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Thanks. I mean, the point or the context in which this question arises is, for me, a change of musical culture, in the sense that there is a setting in which audience is there. In the setting, it is the fact that the audience becomes or takes a function of composing, and so the listener becomes creator, and this is for me a moment of changing the musical culture. And for this, there's also the question then, which function have notation and which function has a score under this context. It is for me not so further leading if we ask for the traditional understanding of score, but for the moment and the special function which arises out of this attempt of Xenakis, really it is a point of changing something, really very basic and very radical.
Okay, well, when I left SEMAMU from 1981, I was working about software fields very different. As Alain, I was just coming to UPIC again. Okay. But I always had secret dreams. First one, the future systems for composing will have a way of use as simple as for UPIC, okay? And secondly, micro-composition. So I remember Xenakis telling that anybody can be son propre luthier. Yes, his own instrument manufacturer. Yes. Okay. Well, so about the systems, very interesting systems. I have heard here, for example, Iannis. Well, it seems that for me, it's more something to have an harmony between graphic and sounds, and okay, more that the two problems I have suggested. Well, that's and for UPIC sketch, okay, the way of use the manual user is very simple. Okay, it's 5 minutes to learn. Okay, but okay, we have not yet the aspect micro-composition that I was waiting. Okay.
You address now the early times, and that was one question I wanted to ask, because they weren't covered in the lectures. At that time, as the idea of UPIC arose, we had a time where graphical notation, this was mentioned already, was becoming in the very modern composers interesting. I remember if you have a notation like not only Stockhausen, some others who write, take this part and then play it twice, and then take that part, play it 5 times, and then choose the ones you wish, and then play it 3 times. It's very close to the aspect you presented with a recursive score. So we have already a field, really a big field of the usage of this kind of concept of graphical notation. I was wondering, what is the real nucleus of this? What was the urge to go into graphical notation? What is the reason that the score is not enough, or that the score is becoming a tool? That would be one paradigm. That score for the composer is a tool. I mean, the symbols, they describe actions. what is the basement of the motivation of all of these approaches where UPIC is one of?
I think it's a very interesting and vast subject. Also, a lot of the scores that you're referring to are kind of moderate compared to, for example, Earl Brown's Four Systems or things like this, which are motivated from yet another desire, I think, of sort of liberating music from the arcanes of tradition and somehow, you know, in the 50s, 60s, when all of this was happening, improvisation had kind of a dirty name in a way. And so rather than inviting people to improvise together, Earl Brown would draw four systems, and this would then sort of justify making the music. But basically, it can only be improvised music. It can only be improvised. So, but I think the motivation, for example, from Xenakis' point of view is radically different and looking for a precision that in a way he couldn't obtain with traditional instruments. So he's looking for more control, whereas other graphic approaches are relinquishing the control. But I think it's a really interesting dichotomy that is worth digging further and looking at different examples. But I'd like to step back just for a second and ask Julien, the three pieces of yours that were played last night, are they fixed pieces or are they different each time you play?
They are, of course, different each time. Otherwise, it would be fixed media. So in the first one, in Constellation, for example, as I said, it's just a control score. So Iannis just send its messages, and that's it. So in that piece, it was the live electronic part that was always changing. In the second and in the third, there is some, we can call them interactive scores, because Iannis communicates bidirectionally with the audio engine and actually the compositional process. So we have some interaction.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm going to anyway. Two questions. Would you ever consider making them fixed media? And would you, second question, whether it's yes or no, are these pieces that can be performed by other performers?
It already happened that I sent fixed media in festival, and they were performed even in different ways, such fixed media without video, just with sound projection. So yes, other people perform them, actually. I wanted to say something, if I can, on the last question about why this system for graphic notation. I didn't heard it. So I think there's a specific issue related to electronic music, which we haven't talked about it, I think. So basically we cannot use the traditional notation for electronic music. So that was an important issue. So the graphical notation was a generalized system of notation, which is clearly understandable. So I think it's a big issue. So like Schaffer used, let's say, a psychoacoustic approach. Iannis instead used an acoustic approach to answer this lack in electronic music.
There is, yeah.
To the question, what's the nucleus of UPIC? I think this is on the one point for me to overcome the static tonal systems, black and white culture, as established in the piano tuning, and to give at the same time biographic, self-produced forms to lead the listening in another direction than it is possibly done if you have not a graphic equivalent. Perhaps you hear a complex sound and think, oh, it could sound like this machine or a garage or auto traffic or whatever. But but by producing this also thought from a pedagogical point of view, but by initializing in a visual context which is self-produced and directly connected, hearable, listenable, connected with this what you hear and listen, this becomes another way to lead an audience more, I think, into this complexity of a sound. And even the moment of play, which is for me quite obvious in this conception, to have to be free from any tuning or from any boundings of traditional music conception, you can by drawing you can create this. This is for me very obvious.
Yeah, I want to add one comment to your words that why is it a necessity to have a score in electroacoustic music? You could say we have our ears, we hear the piece, and the necessity to be generative help for the musical player is not there most of the time. So the only reason a score makes sense is to help the perception, and that's the reason Schaeffer used the perceptive. Yeah, that's perception. I mean, to understand the form, for example, because in our mind we don't have a linear representation of time. How do we understand, for example, proportion comparisons? How would we do this if we hear a piece only? In the Stockhausen said the experience time is different than the objective time. If you have an interesting thing, it can be faster. The time goes fast. If you have a boring thing, time is very slow. So it's very hard to compare proportions. For example, if you have a score, then it is possible. So as one example, but that is for me the only reason for an abstract score to exist in electroacoustic music. But the UPIC and as well Iannis and example Shikashi presented, the score is one thing more. It becomes an instrument. It's not only there to communicate to a player. It becomes an instrument, and that's a new, let's say, layer of existence. So it is on the one hand, it is the representation of the musical work, even though no score contains everything. Every score is missing a lot of information. Like either you do a waveform, then you have everything, but not the meta information, the meta parameters, or you have the meta parameters, then you don't have the waveforms. Yeah. It was.
So I would call them sonification scores. No?
Sonification is. It's too objective. It's because you have a mindset in the score, because you define what and how you want to represent things, because you interpret basically the actions in Iannis, for example. On what level, what actions do you want to be visible, for example? That's your interpretation. And you play with this then that's a generative system then. But at one point you do a decision of what is represented. For example, is the waveform represented or is the meta parameter, are they presented? So at least that would be one answer to this question. One of the many answers. What advantages UPIC brought into this idea of, let's say, electroacoustic music, because I think it's a very specific, as you mentioned, is a very specific electroacoustic music problem or feature which is there. So we need another question. Did one question, how when you spoke to Xenakis and he was explaining you the task,
Excuse me.
when yes, when you spoke to Xenakis and he explained you the idea of UPIC.
L'UPIC, quand Iannis parlait de l'UPIC et la conception de l'UPIC.
La conception de l'UPIC, oui.
What was your reaction to this? What was your
fight for simplicity? It was my only. Okay, no, but because for the UPIC, we had to have an operating system 1 year after. In software, it's very short 1 year.
Yes, even today.
Even today. Okay. So, well, and afterwards, there were some other facilities that we have to add for UPIC Bay, but it needs new equipment and so on. It was not done when I left.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for you, Guy. Iannis loved to tell the story that he became an architect when working in Le Corbusier's studio as an engineer, because other architects would come to him and say, check out this as an engineer. Will this stand up? Will this be good? Right? Tu comprends ce que je dis? Quand Iannis était chez Le Corbusier, en tant qu'ingénieur, il était embauché en tant qu'ingénieur. Les jeunes architectes venaient le voir pour dire est-ce que ça tient debout, fait tes calculs et tout ça. And Iannis would say if he liked it, he would figure out a way that yes, it would be good. But if he didn't like it, he would say, even if it was structurally sound, he would say, no, you should do it this way. Hein? Tu comprends? Donc il adoptait, il jouait avec les dessins des autres pour mettre sa propre patte. What did you bring to UPIC that Iannis doesn't know about?
No, it was not with the specification of UPIC. We kept. It was very clear, so no problem. No question of Iannis about the coding of the core algorithm. No. He was happy that we had a system working for Bonn, I think.
Then
Now, just one thing, maybe important for me. I think music is first, before everything, a social art. To make music together is very important. And it's difficult with electroacoustic in general and computer music. So I think if this is a way of research, I suppose. How can we make music together? For instance, with UPIC Sketch, maybe several machines together around a table with several people and playing together to make a real piece of music, not to play. Pay attention about that. Probably other solutions. The problem is when you are alone above your PC, that's not social music. That's not the social role of the music. And I think many people forgot that.
But then there's the concert. Then you share it in the concert.
It's not enough. The concert is an excuse.
No pill? It's okay. It's an important question. Remember David Tudor when he created Rainforest? You know its spaces? Rainforest? He invited in the 60s many people to live together and to find a transductor, you know, to make music together. Okay, it's an electroacoustic piece. But this piece is recreated today by a French collective like Apo 33 to make music together. And today with the network we can make music together. For example, you have a Cathedral, the place of Cathedral. You know Cathedral? This piece of electroacoustic computer music, Duckworth? No, you don't know? It's an internet piece. It's a community who can participate at event online. It's a piece we can. So it's not a problem, and the problem here is the representation of graphical score to make music together in network. But I think we have technical solution. Voilà.
As a composer, I disagree a little bit that music is composing and music is always about communication. The composer sits alone at home. Even Xenakis, when he's writing his scores, he sits alone at home and doing his things. And the second then he's giving the score to someone else, okay, they have 2 hours of conversation here and there. And then the piano player is exercising the work, and then this guy is going to concert, and there you have the big communication, and that's very similar to electroacoustic music.
That's true, and that's why the score was necessary to be used by several people together. But now when you do your piece yourself, I did it also, and when you play, there is nobody else.
But if you have a composer player, there's quite a few composing and playing, pianists, for example, playing their own compositions. I don't think it's really a very critical point. I understand the point of communication in terms of interpretation, that the score is there's a certain tradition of interpretation. This point I understand as a very critical point of tradition and communication, cultural context, aesthetics, etc. And of course, if you have an electronic piece, there is no aspect or not such a strong aspect of interpretation, even though you do in concerts. You do react to the room acoustics, dynamics. François Bay is playing. Orazio Vagione would play that piece extremely different than I would do it.
I would just like to add, still even to this day, developing new instruments, new software instruments requires a lot of social interaction with a lot of people. As developers of UPIC Sketch obviously know that required a lot of contributions from musicologists, software developers, performers, composers, and with my own practice, I certainly know that it required a lot of communication with other people, playing with the instrument with other people, giving instrument to other people to get feedback. So the stuff I was presenting went through years and years of being tested by other composers and musicians who communicated to me their experience with the tool. So I think this aspect of this social dimension of making music together, or musicking, there's this notion of musicking, playing together. I think it's still there, just shifted. It's slightly placed in different realm, but it's still a social enterprise. Even when at the end you as a composer sit on your own and you compose the piece and you play it back to the audience, there is a lot of interaction happening at different stages of the development.
I have a quick question for the composers, the developers who presented their fascinating and accomplished work. Julien, I'm talking to you too. I just had this flash of a flashback of Xenakis in his house, and I was there with Françoise and Iannis, and Iannis was leaving for Semamu to go and work. And it was like a joke, a running joke between them that I was suddenly privy to, where Françoise said, "Oh, so you're going off to discover the yet unheard of sound again, right?" And Iannis would say, "Oh, yes, oh, yes." And then, a couple of hours later, he would come back, and Françoise would say, "Did you find it?" And he said, "No, not yet." This search, this quest, literally a passionate quest for the yet unheard of sound, of being able to create something that has never been heard before. Is this part of your paradigm or not? Because it seems so much about process, it seems so much about, but the whole idea of just an unbelievable sound, an unheard of sound, has sort of left the discourse.
As I answered later to François Bernard, in the question he asked me before in the speech, and I just said, to me, complexity is just something you reach from simplicity.
I didn't say complex. I said unheard of, unheard.
Unheard.
It could be simple. It could be so simple. Maybe that's why Iannis never found it. Maybe he was looking.
To me, I know if it's an answer, but I would get to something unheard through the interaction between sounds. So I want them to interact. So that's why I talked about simplicity. So I started with simple sounds, and by making them interact each other, I would create something unheard through the making them. I don't know the word now, but put in relation.
Yeah, just 1 second. I think maybe it's also a generational question, and maybe this is why François Bernard was talking about it. It's something that we all dealt with Iannis, about this unheard of sound, and why micro-composition, where, François Bernard is saying, and even Guy is saying, UPIC Sketch has to have the capacity for micro-composition, because we're still looking for what hasn't been invented yet, Sorry.
Unheard sound. I have never experienced such a thing. Yeah, and it's kind of dangerous to have kind of an iconic sound, because I think the entire music industry or music world is becoming kind of temporal thing. So many popular musicians offers kind of really iconic sound. Like you recognize this artist in 1 second or 2 seconds. So I think the music is becoming kind of pictures. So you can consume the music in 1 second or 2 seconds. And if you use kind of specific unheard sound or specific timbre or very iconic sound as kind of identify yourself, the music is becoming drawing or visual or something consumed very quickly.
I have a question about the UPIC project. If we...
Because I want to answer to this question, then we do your question after. Yes. Yeah, okay. For me as a composer, I agree a little bit that the times are different. We have a multi-aesthetic, poly-everything society. We are aware of the presence of so many productions. We are exposed to so many different kinds of music. We have so much electronic music being produced at the same time, so I wouldn't have the desire to create something unheard, because it is an impossible aim. It's an impossible task, because you find everything everywhere somehow. I think we are in a completely different time. This is not the task we want to fulfill. We are looking, for example, we are looking for something identifiable. We are looking, and this is a big difference to the 70s, I think. We are looking towards contexts. The newness of thing has no value. The context has a value. Yeah, this is.
Okay, I would agree also to your thoughts. About the UPIC project, if we think that change the tablet interface with the brain-computer interface and we're able to draw a score directly with our brainwaves, would be still a UPIC project, or should be a different project? What do you think? I want to ask the creators.
No, I was just. It was really one of the fantasies, or what? How do you call that? I really would like that one day, to be able to draw with just the mind. We are not so far from that with brain-computer interfaces. So that's yeah, definitely.
It's still a UPIC.
So would it be still UPIC? Yeah, so there's not the hand, which is the closest organ to the brain. So I don't know. We are just from the brain, so we are even closer. Maybe, I don't know. As soon as we have enough reactiveness and speed in feedback between what you think and what is happening, of course.
There's another question.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to ask a very naive question maybe, but I'm allowed to, as I'm a visual artist. And I would like to know if one of the composers that are here today ever felt the need to work together with a graphic designer who is really trained to communicate visually with a potential musician, for example. I'm asking because I'm admiring Xenakis not only for his music, but at the same time for his visual skills. So he was able to do both. And yeah, how do you see that? Is there any?
I collaborated with a visual artist who very recently, actually, the premiere of this installation would be October 6 at Biennale di Arte di Salerno. And actually, I asked him to write drafts of the soundscape of a specific soundscape, where I collected sounds and then imported these drafts into Iannis and build this audiovisual installation. So actually I didn't use it as a sequencer just to, let's say, control the positioning and the editing of the graphics I imported. So that could be an example of misuse or another use of these tools.
I don't mean. There's also another beautiful, very beautiful example, and an artist who I think is rare also because he shares the same two qualities as Xenakis, and he happens to be a student of Xenakis, is Pascal Dussapin, who has always been drawing all of his life as well, and taking beautiful photographs, and also is obviously a very accomplished composer. And using Iannis, you guys did the installation, which was called...
I didn't actually, but the Iannis team, I don't remember the name. Yeah, of course, it's on the Iannis showcase. Now I don't remember the name, yes.
Were you here yesterday? Yes. So as you can heard, I told that in 80 a group of 5 visual artists did a piece at Lille, and we present the piece to a competition of electroacoustic music in Paris, and they win the first prize.
I have a question for composers. For you, it's important to play your music in 20 years or not?
In what?
In 20 years or not? Play your music in 20 years. It's important for you or not?
For me personally, it would be, and I remember that we have done some productions with Stockhausen. I remember to admire that he has always created even complex things in that way that they will be recreatable in 20 years. In many of his works, for example, like the one we did in 2009, the Strahlen. There was a composition prepared for choir and orchestra, string orchestra, and he did that structure and put it to vibraphone. So a vibraphone cannot do a glissando. So how do you do the glissando? But he described exactly what he wants as a result. He only describes the result and not the process to come towards this result. So if we lose the production we did, which took quite a long time, there's a score which can a result description basically, which can recreate, which can guide you to recreate the result again. That's a very clever way, and we at ZKM face this problem. That's the reason we have thought a lot about this. We have faced this with media art and everything. We have many works done with Onyx, silicon graphic Onyx. I mean, it's the youngest machine is probably whatever 20 years old or 15, either you do what they have done with the Boulez works in IRCAM, you do every 10 years a transformation into the actual version of Max. That you would do only with very important works, works which have a lobby, I would consider, or I would call it, and that means that we will lose certain works and we will not be able to rediscover certain works because there is no description of the result. That's a big problem, except a certain thing would be like, you had this discussion before, for example, your work to record it. You have a definition of the result, but you don't have the definition of the algorithms creating the result. So the most clever way would be to define the procedure, how to create the result, and Of course, everyone is working on automatic, let's say, descriptors or procedures. One way in Zirconium, we have, as a developer of Zirconium, Shikashi knows it, we have a description of how to notate a complex score. It's a limitation, the way, it's an arc definition. You define the angle and the breakpoint envelope, the angle, the time, the beginning point, the end point, basically, and then you have to perform the movement. With this kind of description, you have an A4 page, and you can, or 2 or 3 A4 page, and you can recreate a very complex spatial movement score in 2,000 years. Very easy, very precise, exact. But when you have a system which samples, you need all the data, and the data are more. So that it's not 2 or 4 A4 pages, it's more than this. And this is the dilemma we are in. One part is very creative and, for example, intuitive. Let me think of one, Claude Cados, and maybe if you know the physical model of Claude Cados, you have the Newton's law, you have the algorithms there, and then you have quite a few parameters. Again, one A4 page, which you can define a sound, which will be, as long as the laws of mechanics are valid, be reproducible. It's an extremely clever way to compress data.
That's a score.
It's yeah, true. It's a score. And ideally, it would be if all composers would work in this way and would leave recreatable, reperformable prescriptions. But that's not how it is. So the only result would be, or the compromise would be, to document. That's at least something, that we have an impression of the history. Or to reinterpret. That's another level which sometimes happen with media art. For example, think of the Namjoon Pike wall. These are screens of analog tubes. Can you do the same colors on the LCD screen? It's absolutely impossible. Another thing, the formats of these screens, the strange formats. It's very hard to recreate these strange kind of multi-dimensional screens. So there are many aspects of a work, and in music the same, which will be definitely lost. But you can think of analyzing the central idea of a piece in art and look of technology which is able to transport the essence of it. So this kind of interpretation is, I think, very hard in electronic music, and especially like Shikashi was what you are doing in performative music.
I would like to add as well something to this, what Rutger just mentioned, kind of historical account of from a kind of Xenakian field of research. Peter Hoffmann, a German musicologist who in the late 90s did a big research project on recreation of Xenakis Genden, which can be considered a score and a piece in one. Ended up using a newer machine than the original computer running in like late 80s, early 90s, running basic programming language. He used Windows-based machine, and he ended up having better computational capacities, better than Xenakis had in 1991. But the sound results were totally different. And he couldn't find the reason. He said, like, he followed the score. He made the same, computations, but faster. Like, he was more efficient. He ended up having to corrupt his code to make it sound closer to the original. And it is quite interesting point in this discussion of what are we trying to preserve, and and although the original code of Gendin still exists, it's being reprinted in formalized music. Can you get the same sonic results with contemporary computers? There are, I think, 4 or 5 versions of Gendin algorithm just within Super Collider environment. Each sound slightly different. Each has slightly different timbral qualities, which bring like different possibilities for composition. Which I think there is this one idea about preserving and kind of recreating, remodeling the original piece of software, which is very often bound to the computers which were used at that time. And then there is this whole research of kind of extending it and creating new works based on the same principles. But I think it's an interesting point, and then this whole discussion about preserving and extending and so on. Yeah.
Okay. So, what was the question about? Okay, so Ludwig told about the kind of archiving project. It's about a spatial composition, and we try to preserve the movement of sound somehow, and we used SPAT diff. It's a kind of open source specification to describe the sound movement in specific way. So it's kind of notational rule for the sound movement. But actually, this project, the ICST, the institute abandoned this project. So I think it's a kind of problem. So an European notation system is really so million people know how to notate in this way, but we can't make new rule and so disseminate so easily. So that's really big problem. Yeah.
But how would you preserve or recreate your performative pieces? So when you think you are now, let's imagine you are 30 and you want to perform your piece when you're 70. And you have 20 generations of computers and software, Windows and Mac versions, Mac OS 120. What will you do? What will you do?
It's impossible. Yes, it's impossible. Yeah, I gave up. Actually, it's not possible. And I have more than I compose more than 30 pieces, and I can't maintain all pieces. And what I do is just upload all my composition to GitHub, open source. So if somebody are interested in, just download. That's possible. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because you said open source. So it's you should on doit s'interroger sur la gouvernance de la création musicale.
We have to ask ourselves the question about the governance of musical creation.
Yes, because l'autoritativité.
Authoritativity. Authoritative.
Yeah, because open source, you have community, and what's your role in composer? For a composer, what's your role in the community of open source?
So I usually program program for my pieces, and then there is software, and this is authored by me, and it's GNU licensed. So it means somebody use my program, they have to mention my name. So in this way, kind of, I'm the originator of that idea and software, but that's it. Somebody can change.
You are thinking about your what license I choose to publish my work. You have a GitHub or not?
Yeah, GitHub, yes.
Yeah, GitHub. GitHub is Microsoft now, you know?
I can understand.
Microsoft buying GitHub.
Microsoft,
yeah. What? Yeah, you know what I mean? It's a problematic because the creation. Well, you know what I mean. Can you remember?
Well, yeah, the problem of proprietary elements, and it's as with GitHub is a good example. Things change, and it was. We know the image of Microsoft, and before GitHub was something different, but suddenly it's in the context of a Microsoft-owned business, and it is something different than it has before. And these companies, as we know with Google, they accumulate public knowledge, accumulate and control. And that's another very, let's say, frightening thing for the future. But we should be aware of it, and we should support institutions. We should support structures which are independent as long as they are independent. And like CIX is in the University of Rouen, as we have in Europe a public sector. I mean, that's how to melt it down compared to the outside of Europe commercialized existence of nearly everything. I think we are now at a completely different end where we started, but the time tells me that we should put a stop here. And I think we started with the motivation for UPIC. We talked about technical implications, about ideas of how to think, how things were invented, how technology, in which context technology was invented, and then we were talking about the modern consequences. Very important topic was the score, the idea of the score, the function of the score. Is a composition a communication, or is it artistic creation? Many questions. Some of you really we found some answer or some enlightenment or some new idea. Many of them we could not answer, which is very good, because then we have more questions for us to think of. And the last one is a little bit depressive, but reality is not always good to us. Sometimes it is. Thank you all.